welcome everyone to this webinar, which is the 10th webinar in the Social Innovation series organized by Católica-Lisbon with the European Investment Bank Institute. This is a seminar that will be a bit different from the others because we are in a way closing a cycle. We started these webinars about a year ago in October, having about one per month, and you can see in the screen the topics that we've covered so far. And today, since the next webinar will be after the summer, September 24, we decided to do a more interactive webinar with interaction before through your questions. And I will address and discuss some of your questions, but also be very open to any questions that you want to raise during the seminar itself. So you can either raise your hand in the software and you can speak, or you can type your question and we will engage in a discussion. For those who have not been in prior seminars, my name is Filipe Santos. I'm a professor of social entrepreneurship and Dean of Católica-Lisbon, and also the director for this webinar series. I gave the first seminar on strategies for scaling impact, and also the ones on financing and on social franchising. Now, before these, I see some familiar faces there. Peter Mangan, hello, how are you? And some others. So welcome everyone. And as we presented this proposal, we got many questions from you guys, which is great. And we organized those questions in 4 main topics. One, fundamentals of social innovation. The second, a few questions about how to partner with large companies. A third, about the non-profit and for-profit discussions. And the fourth, about financing. So we organized the questions in these 4 groupings, and I will go a bit deep into each of these topics in turn. We put financing at the end because we had a webinar specifically on finance, but we have very interesting questions on the first 2, especially on the fundamental of social innovation and on partnering with large companies. And that will allow us to have a nice dialogue and a nice flow. So as usual, these slides will be made available for you once after the seminar, so you will see all of the information that we'll be discussing. So, ready to get started. In the first grouping of questions, we had a question about the distinction between social innovation and social entrepreneurship. What are great examples of social innovation? What are some of the common elements of social innovations throughout the world? Some of the challenges of managing social innovation as a professional, and the link between social entrepreneurship and sustainability. So let me share some of my ideas on each of these topics. And don't forget, at any point in time, please share an idea, raise an additional point if you want to. One point is about the distinction. Sometimes we speak about social innovation, other times we speak about social entrepreneurship. And why do we use these 2 words and what do they mean? And for me, there are very specific meanings and concepts attached to each of these elements and definitions. So social entrepreneurship for me is a process. It's a process of innovating, a process of seeing an issue, a problem, and coming up with a solution that can deal with that problem and then prove that that solution works. Normally, why do we say it's social entrepreneurship? Because we are implementing a solution that aims to be innovative, different from what exists, aims to be sustainable, can pay and cover its own costs, and addresses societal issues that often are neglected, are invisible to others, or they may be visible to others, but there are no good solutions to address those problems. And so often social entrepreneurs are a bit pioneers, are ahead of the curve. In the first few years, no one really understands what they're trying to do. They have to be persistent, resilient, show grit in terms of continuing developing their solution. And often, if they are addressing a truly important and neglected problem, they are proven visionary after the fact. But usually the first few years are very challenging for social entrepreneurs. For me, one has a social innovation when the proposed solution that you bring as a social entrepreneur to the market or to a sector is proven to generate impact, meaning it's proven to create a change that is significant, that's meaningful when compared to what exists elsewhere. So if you're trying to develop a new solution to improve the employability of a certain segment of the population, you have to ask yourself, is this better than going to the employment center? If I compare with the standard solution that we currently have, how does my solution compare? So this idea of comparison is fundamental, because sometimes we do good things, but we spend so much effort and so much resources of society to do those good things that we're actually not adding impact, we're not creating value. We are doing a bit of good, but not really innovating. So you can be a social entrepreneur and fail as a social innovator because you never were able to validate and prove a social innovation. You can be a social innovator without being a social entrepreneur. If you, for example, innovate and create a solution inside the government or inside a large company, you may be a social entrepreneur or a public entrepreneur and develop a social innovation. So for me, this distinction is important also because while a normal entrepreneur, a commercial entrepreneur, is typically focused on managing your venture, your organization, I believe that social entrepreneurs should be focused on managing your solution, your social innovation, independent of the organization. You may have a company, you may have a charity, but the company, the organization is just the vehicle for you to develop the social innovation and to validate it, to perfect it, to take it to the market and for adoption by others. And these focus on social innovation makes social entrepreneurs truly distinct from other agents in the economy. So for me, I have this clear mindset between the process of innovating for the common good, being a social entrepreneur, and developing and validating a solution that proves to work, that you then try to scale and embed in society. Are there any comments or follow-ups to this? This is, for me, it's a basic distinction that informed my work. For example, I try to understand in one of my papers what's the role of social entrepreneurs in society, and it's to create this engine of distributed innovation through which many new ideas arise, ideas oriented for the common good. And then the management and scaling of social innovation, which is more important than the managing of a social enterprise, because social innovations is where the value is created. Any comments or reactions to this that you'd like to share? Does this make sense for you, this distinction? This is a starting point. But your questions also went a bit deeper into some of the topics. One question that one of you asked was, what is for you the greatest example of social innovation? And this is a tough one because it requires choosing one compared to many others, and it's greatest because of the scale, because of the impact, because of the innovation. But usually I have one social innovation that I think is truly transformative and has been scaled to a global impact. And if you, sometimes in the commercial world, we discuss about unicorns. This one for me is maybe one of the rare social unicorns that we have in the last 10, 20 years. And the one that I would choose to answer this example or this question is something that you are very familiar with. And let me ask you a question. And also I'm seeing some of you that are in the screen. I'm seeing 4 of you. Raise your hand if you have bought an encyclopedia in the last, let's say, 10 years? No hands. Raise your hands if you have used Wikipedia in the last week. Okay, I saw 3 hands out of 3. Of the ones that are showing the camera. And indeed, the solution I chose is Wikipedia. And let me explain you why. One reason is because, of course, it is a social innovation. It's a solution that has grown and scaled globally and reaches nowadays more than 1 billion people around the world. So it fits the requirement of having global scale. But I choose it for other reasons. One is that sometimes we tend to believe that market-based solutions are more powerful and should be the standard. And when a market cannot be developed or fails, then we have a public service, or then we have something different because the market has failed. This is actually a solution where it has disrupted and won over market-based solutions. Because what is this solving as a solution? It's solving the societal challenge and problem of sharing knowledge. We advance as mankind, humankind, when we share each other's knowledge and use that knowledge for progress. But sharing knowledge is very difficult because it needs to be codified, it needs to be transmitted. There's no value to be gained of sharing knowledge unless we can protect it and sell it. But selling knowledge is difficult. So what did you have in the past? We had a market-based solution, which was the encyclopedia concept. I am an editor of an encyclopedia. I buy the content from experts. I package it in a book, and then I sell the books door to door, or to people, or to schools, or to universities, or to companies. It was a market-based solution. I transact knowledge. Then came, did it work? Yes. It killed a lot of trees. It was very expensive because you need to produce a lot of books, 20 books for Encyclopedia Britannica, but it worked. Then came the digital age. And what happened? We had something that some of you may recall called Microsoft Encarta, right? Did you remember Encarta? The same concept, a market-based solution. We have an editor, in this case Microsoft, that buys the knowledge from experts, codifies it into a CD, now with images and not only words, but also images and videos, sells the CD for $29.99. Does it work? Yes. It's more efficient than a printed book. It's cheaper, but does it fully solve the knowledge sharing problem? Not really. Needs to be always updated, doesn't reach everyone. Then comes Wikipedia with a different model. So a solution that, compared with the dominant one, which is the market-based encyclopedia, is different because it believes that the knowledge resides not in experts, but in each one of us, that each one of us has an intrinsic motivation to share our knowledge with the others, and that's enough to exert an effort of sharing. And through a clever digital platform that's open, people can put their knowledge, they can correct and revise each other's knowledge, they can access it for free. And because it's scalable and open, it reached everyone in the world and it eradicated the normal encyclopedias. It's not, in many ways, not a perfect encyclopedia in terms of the quality of the knowledge, but it's always improving. It exists in multiple languages, reaches multiple countries. So it's a volunteer open-based model that disrupted a market-based model because it's a more efficient solution. So for me, this example teaches me that markets do not always win. In many occasions, you need a public service, you need an open volunteer-based model, or you need a market-based model. So social entrepreneurs tend to be very pragmatical and not very ideological. They say, what's the issue that we need to solve in society that's important to solve? What's the best mechanism that we can put in place, the best solution to solve that problem? And then they are pragmatic in implementing it. Okay? As opposed to being ideological, as many people are, and saying, no, it has to be the government doing it, or no, it has to be the markets doing it, the governments are very inefficient, or it has to be a charity model. Social entrepreneurs are pragmatic. They use the tools and mechanisms that society made available to us to solve problems. And that's what makes, I believe, social entrepreneurs much more powerful as agents of innovation in society than being in a company or being in government or even being a commercial entrepreneur. So that's for me an example of a great social innovation, maybe one of the greatest. I could mention many others that had significant impact in people's life. Sometimes things like Florence Nightingale created the nursing profession in the 19th century. She reshaped the hygiene in hospitals and created a profession, nursing, that was in charge of taking care of the patients, complementing the medical intervention. That has probably saved millions of lives over decades. So there could be many others, but I think this is a nice one to bring. This Florence Nightingale example also tells us that social entrepreneurs were not discovered or born in the last 30 years. They have existed every time in society since millennial ages, and they have always been present and have always been an engine for societal progress. Maybe I would say the engine for societal progress until very recently. So that was the second question that you asked. Now, you also asked, but how can we identify social innovations, and what are some of the common elements that you typically see in social innovations? I would say that almost all the social innovation that I see that has some base of validation starts from three main premises, three main elements. One is the focus on a societal problem. It's mission oriented. The goal is not self-enrichment or enrichment of others. The goal is creating value for others. So that's the starting point, the mission orientation, usually in an area of society that has been neglected by others. For example, until very recently, mental health was a taboo in society. Still today, there are a lot of social entrepreneurs working on mental health issues. Before the refugee crisis became visible, there were many people working on refugee integration issues. Now it became popular, but there have been social entrepreneurs doing it for the last 15 or 20 years. So as I said, social entrepreneurs typically ahead of the curve, doing what they know it's important and needed in the next 5 or 10 years. This other element, innovation, also has an element that I would call simplicity. The idea at the core of each social innovation, it's usually a very simple idea. Very simple, can be described in one word or one sentence usually. It's so simple that's disarming. And because it's disarming, people usually don't believe in it in the beginning until social entrepreneurs validate it. I'll give you 3 or 4 examples. In Roots of Empathy, Mary Gordon put babies in the classroom to teach kids about empathy. Putting a baby in the classroom to teach about empathy, using the baby, which is the thing that humankind most easily connects with emotionally, was a simple yet fundamental idea. Miguel Neve in Portugal with Colored created a universal color code for colorblind people, using the primary colors as symbols and combining those symbols of the 3 primary colors. Created a language that's understood in 5 minutes and can make a colorblind person understand what color is an object or a piece of garment or anything. Yunus started with the premise that if you lend to very poor people that will use it to create a small business, they'll be able to pay back and improve their lives. That was a crazy idea for banks at the time. They said it's crazy, you're going to lose all your money, poor people are going to just get the money and run away. This is ridiculous. And yet today, the average default rate in microfinance around the world is about 2%, and the average default rate of normal loans, business loans, and loans for wealthy people is about 5%. So it's actually more than twice safer to lend to very poor people that may be illiterate compared to lending money to very large corporations. But all of these ideas, when they were proposed, seemed stupid, seemed contrary to common wisdom, and they were rejected. That's why you needed kind of the persistence, the vision of a social entrepreneur. So innovation, but around a simple, essential idea. And finally, the idea of impact. Whatever you do, your solution needs to have improvements in the situation that are significant and lasting. It's not an alleviation of symptoms, it's solving of the causes. It's impact that stays, either because it changes the situation of the beneficiary, it's because it changes the system or the behaviors or practices. So typically you will find these three elements in every social innovation. Not in every social entrepreneurial effort, but sometimes you don't have these elements in the beginning. You are trying to tackle a problem, but you don't have an innovation. But for those that go into social innovation, that are able to validate a social innovation, you usually have an idea that's mission-oriented to create value in society, that has an innovative, simple, essential idea, and creates impact, significant and lasting changes in people's situation or planet situation. There are three other elements that, if they exist, they will make the social innovation very powerful, but they are not easy to design into the solution. So sometimes it's very hard to do it. Other times they don't exist at all, and the solution has a limited potential. So one is the idea of empowerment. It's not we are here to give something to other people, is engaging and involving the beneficiaries, the key stakeholders in the solution itself. And Wikipedia is a prime example by saying, if you want knowledge, some of you may have to contribute to knowledge, so we need you to be empowered to contribute your knowledge as well. So this idea of empowerment, there's a wonderful project created here at Católica called Patient Innovation, which is a bit of a Wikipedia for rare medical diseases, where someone that has a rare medical disease that the doctors have no cure, they can, through their daily practice, come up with solutions that work for them, share those solutions in the platform, and those solutions are then shared with everyone with the same disease around the world. They can try those solutions, see if it works to solve their issue. And so the patients are empowered to find solutions that work for them and for others, solutions that then have a due diligence medically, of course, but that the solution comes from the patient, not from the doctor. So empowerment makes solutions more powerful, they makes them lower cost, and they makes them much more engaging and viral than if it's something that you just offer without engaging with the participants. The second aspect, I would say, is the issue of scalability. You need to design a solution in a way that you can scale a magnitude bigger, meaning you can scale 100 times. Scale in social entrepreneurial terms is not saying I'm going to grow 10% per year. That's not scale. Scale is saying I now serve 100 people, I want to serve 10,000. And then in 5 years, 1 million. How do I go from 100 to 1 million? How do I design, codify, and develop my solution to be truly scalable? Do I use technology? Do I use knowledge codification? Do I use clever replication mechanisms? How do I design it for scale? Because if you don't design it for scale, you may reach 100 people or 1,000, but you will not change the world. Okay? And sometimes designing for scale could be, I will scale it myself to a certain point, and once it's so obvious that it works, I will give it away, I will make other people adopt it just by imitation, and then it reaches everyone. That could be one strategy for scaling, but you need to think about scaling and design scaling into your operational model of your solution. The third element that is desirable and that you need to build into is sustainability. And sustainability is something that I will discuss a bit later in the, I think in question number 5, but it's basically the idea of the solution being able to pay for itself. Economic sustainability, in the sense that the costs of delivering are covered in some ways by the act of delivering itself. If I'm always dependent on charity to develop my solution. I do good things. I hope someone will pay for it as a donation. The issue is that you cannot scale 100 times because you cannot get 100 times more donations. You need a mechanism, a model that allows for scaling the resources that you use. That sometimes comes from a very low cost, a Wikipedia model where people volunteer to participate. It sometimes comes from market-based solution where people pay to receive it, or an impact contract where they pay for the impact that you generate. There are different mechanisms, we can discuss them a little bit later, but you need to design sustainability into your solution. So sometimes the challenge is, while you have the three elements on the left side, you need to build during the first few years the three elements on the right side to be truly a game-changing solution for the world. Any elements that you think should be here? Any common elements that you'd like to share or that you believe should be here and I am not bringing it? Anyone would like to share? Are there any questions? Or I'm hoping this will not be entirely a monologue and that you'll want to participate a little bit as well. We have about 20 people in the webinar, so let's see who else has. Okay, so interrupt me at any time. What are the main challenges faced by social innovation professionals, by you guys in the field running your social innovations? I think the issues, some of the issues are typical to any entrepreneur, so I will focus maybe on what is more distinct. And one is, I would call this idea of managing duality and its complexity. What do I mean by this? To some extent, commercial companies have a very clear purpose. They need to have a profitable product or service that they can make money from. And so they have a client to engage with, they need to work with the client, get payment, and need to be profitable. So there's, although they may need to be socially responsible, they have a clear focus. Social entrepreneurs have a dual focus. They need to make sure that they are economically viable in terms of their solution. They need to make sure that they have impact. And they often live in worlds that are not entirely coherent sometimes. They need to deal with the government, and they need to make partnership with companies, and they are dealing with the social sector organization. So they live in multiple worlds, and they need to manage this complexity and these dualities. So that makes us, many of us, a bit schizophrenic, but others very good at dealing with complexity and with paradox. How do I make money and help people at the same time? How do I use this paradox to my advantage, to the advantage of my innovation and creativity? And specifically, they need to, as we discussed before, perfect both their business model, how their solution operates economically, and their impact model, how it transforms lives. So they need to have a theory of change for their solution, what is the change they want to create in the beneficiaries, in the system, what are the causal links from what you do to the immediate outcomes, to the long-term change, and how do you prove that it works and refine it over time. So this duality is not easy to manage, and it's hard for us individually to be good in both dimensions. So you may need to have a team effort here with someone more focused on the economic side, someone more focused on the social side, or someone that can live in both worlds and can practice and integrate and find synergies between these two worlds in a more of a lockstep model. Let me maybe spend a little bit more time on this part, which I think is one of the real challenges that I see in some very successful social innovations. Social entrepreneurs are not very good at letting go of their baby. And by letting go, I mean maybe two different things. One is, as we discussed before, they have spent maybe 5 years or 10 years building an organization that they love and building a team that they love. It could be a charity, it could be a social enterprise or an impact venture, but they've spent the time building the organization. But if they are truly social entrepreneurs, their focus should be not the organization, but their solution, their social innovation. So they may need to shift from running an organization to scale and mainstream their solution, even if that makes the organization weaker. And that challenge, that is not easy to do. And sometimes they stay too focused, too stuck with their organization. And because of that, their solution does not scale, does not mainstream, does not have the impact that it could have. So that's one way in which social entrepreneurs don't let go of their baby, in this case, their baby being their venture. The other way in which they don't let go is they don't truly delegate. At some point, social entrepreneurs need to delegate the operational part of the business and be the visionaries trying to shape and influence the ecosystem. They may need to bring different practices into the organization. They may need to engage with different partners, but they sometimes are so the persistence and stubbornness that was valuable in the early days when you were fighting against adversity actually starts to backfire when you as an entrepreneur gets too rigid and too stuck and too close to what you have always done and what you think works and don't adjust with the times. And by doing that, you ended up limiting the potential of your solution and of your venture as well. So I see that maybe as a main challenge, especially for the successful social entrepreneurs, is their difficulty in letting go in these two dimensions. And so how do you deal with that? I would say you can deal with that in different ways. One is, for example, having a coach, a mentor, a board member that has been through the process or has a lot of experience and can see the signals of danger when you are trying to not delegate or controlling too tightly things, and help you make that transition. So that's one way. The other way sometimes is just to leave, is to say, I'm now going to give this away for the next person to continue running it, and I'm going to try my next challenge, because usually social entrepreneurs are very innovative. They are always seeing problems to be solved, but sometimes it's better to let the organization continue running your solution, and you start a new cycle of innovation. And that's partly what I've done in my own work. I work mostly in social entrepreneurship in academia and in social innovation policy. And so the things that I've done, first with IES Social Business School, a business school for social innovators, then with the Laboratory for Social Investment, in terms of building investment solutions for entrepreneurs, and then leaving to go for government policy to launch the National Social Innovation Policy. I've learned that I'm good at the early days of new projects and developing the new challenge. That's what excites me, and it's better if I delegate entirely or leave and let what I've initially co-founded with other people be managed by others. And so this idea of being a serial social entrepreneur, I think, has merit, has value, and it's something that is actually very nice. The starting again, it's very nice and allows the people who stay in the organization to fully take control and ownership and bring their own ideas, which they cannot do while the founder is still there, shaping how things should be done. The final question was on this topic of the fundamentals of social innovation, was what is the state of social entrepreneurship in relation with sustainability? Now, this question is a bit ambiguous and can be interpreted in two different ways. So I'll discuss the two possible interpretations. One could be saying, when we speak about corporate sustainability and companies trying to do good, is this social entrepreneurship? And I would say it can be a form of social entrepreneurship. So there has been in companies a very strong development in the last 10 years around issues of social responsibility and sustainability. Companies are much more, especially large companies, are much more aware of the issues affecting their stakeholders, affecting the planet, and addressing those issues. When they try to be socially responsible, they're not social entrepreneurs. They're just mitigating their risks and their negative impacts on society. When they become more proactive, think about solutions to solve issues in their value chain or leveraging opportunities that they can use their resources to solve societal problems. Which is the third stage of corporate sustainability, which is from just risk mitigation to proactive cancelling of negative impacts to strategic CSR. When they are more strategic oriented, they are essentially doing social entrepreneurship. They are being entrepreneurs inside the company for the common good. So that's one way to interpret this question. The other would be, does social entrepreneurship have to be sustainable? And I would say yes, but not necessarily through a market-based solution, meaning you don't have to sell a product or service to be sustainable. That may work in some areas. As I discussed before, you could actually be sustainable by having a very low cost in an open platform that empowers people. You could have a government contract against impact through a social impact bond, for example. There's different ways to be sustainable, but you have to think about your economic sustainability and design it into your model. Okay? So that's my quick answer to this question 5. So we have a question from Pilar, who is curious about the government role in social innovation. And that's a good question. That's a good question, and I would say that in many cases, governments can be great social innovators. I would say especially at the local level. So for example, we've done a study in Portugal, a mapping of social innovation in Portugal, in the country, a few years ago. And some of the innovations that we found were developed and validated at the local level, usually at the municipality level or the city level. And why? Because municipal or city authorities, they are close to the problems, because they see the problems at very close. It's in their neighborhoods. They are very agile. They usually command, at least in Portugal, they have some command of resources that they can allocate, and they can engage with local stakeholders. So I think local governments, city level municipalities can be a great engine of social innovation, and with the advantage of their social innovations possibly being replicated by other municipalities once they get validated. So that's one angle. At the central level, there are maybe maybe fewer examples of social innovation. They do exist. You could argue that in Portugal, the creation of the national health system was potentially a social innovation. But I find that usually social innovations at the national level, they start at a local or regional level, and then as they work well, they get taken to as a national policy. So that's one area. Maybe the second part of the question is, instead of being agents of social innovation, can governments or public policy be a promoter of social innovation? And there, I think the answer is undoubtedly yes. They can be a promoter of social innovation through their financing mechanisms, through regulation, as Pilar is asking, by setting the boundaries and allowing then the market to innovate. One example of regulation, I don't know if you know, but it's now the anniversary of something that happened in the European university systems, which was the Bologna Agreement, where a few ministers of education of different countries came together and said, let's create a standardized credit transfer system, let's create mobility of students across Europe, and let's divide education in 3 cycles, undergraduate, master, and PhD. Within that, countries can do whatever they want, but let's create these minimum standards and recognition across countries. As they did that, that spurred a new market and mobility across Europe that one argue could lead to social innovation, allowing a lot of different universities to innovate in their programs, to develop new strategies. And so regulation and setting the frame in which the private sector and the social sector can engage and work is fundamental for governments and for public policy. So I would say governments have a role in local level innovation, through financing, incentivizing the scaling and the validation of social innovations, not by direct financing, but by matching or supporting the financing of private sector and individuals. And third, by creating the right frame and regulation, standards of quality, standards of accreditation, standards of recognition that allows then the market and the citizen sector to engage and innovate. Any other questions? So I'm closing this cycle of the fundamentals of social innovation. Are there any other questions on this topic? Okay, so let's move to the second block of questions, which have to do with a very important topic. I think is probably one of the next frontiers in social innovation, which is the partnering and the engagement of large companies. And here there were a different set of questions. How can established companies become engines for social innovation? How can social innovators better engage and partner with companies? And how, if you do so, how do you protect yourself from being taken over, from being controlled or subsumed by this large partner? And how best to align the needs and challenges of corporations and startups? And eventually there was a question about taxes here. So let me address essentially the first 3. So how can established companies become engines for social innovation? And should they? Should companies be involved in social innovation? And then how best to work with them? I think the answer is, for me, a big yes, in the sense, I think companies, especially large corporations, if they enter the field of social innovation, especially in partnership with social entrepreneurs, they can make a huge difference. Because what they have is exactly what social entrepreneurs sometimes lack or miss. They have a very strong brand and corporate reputation. So when they do something or they adopt a specific solution, they bring to it a lot of credibility. And sometimes credibility is what social entrepreneurs lack, because they are entrepreneurs, they're trying to validate a crazy idea, no one pays attention. So when a big company, a Google, a Microsoft, a Nestlé, a Danone, becomes involved on something, people pay attention. And when they become involved on something, they have scale and reach. Companies usually have thousands of shops, they have hundreds of distribution points, they have large teams. So if they get engaged or committed to an issue or a topic, they can have a huge difference in the scale and reach they bring to the problem or to the issue. And finally, they have a lot of competencies around technology, around marketing, around distribution that can be very valuable to complement what social entrepreneurs bring. And then they, of course, have resources. They can finance, they can put resources into a solution to validate it or to bring it to sustainability. And so there are some examples of where companies, by getting involved on a specific issue, they change the system or change the needle around that issue. An example that I like to share is the example of how SAP, the German software company, engaged with a social entrepreneur called Specialstern, which was doing the integration, job employment integration of young people with autism. 85 to 90% of people diagnosed with autism, they will not have a career, they will not have a job, they will be unemployed as they become adults. And Specialstern was a social company, a social entrepreneur, trying to address this issue and realizing that people with autism have strong competencies in certain areas that are unique and valuable, and trying to match those competencies around pattern recognition, around quality control, around call center support with companies. They were doing that in a service provision model, but that was very difficult to scale because it was very difficult for them to hire. They had hired 20 people with autism to provide services to large companies, but they had difficulty in hiring 2,000 or 20,000 because of the complexity of managing these. But they convinced SAP, the software company, to create a program called Autism at Work, where SAP would integrate people with autism into their workforce as regular employees in working on these areas. That program was very successful in the first SAP office, got replicated to other SAP offices, got imitated by other technology companies like Microsoft and Cisco, and suddenly became, to some extent, a norm, became normal and desirable to hire people with autism, offering them the same salary level and just with a specific type of jobs, but with the same conditions as anyone else. And at some point, SAP even made a commitment to hire, there's about 0.5% of people with autism in the population, and they said we aim to hire over the years 0.5% of our workforce of people with autism, because we don't want to discriminate against people with that condition, and we value them as we value everyone else. So when this happens, you have a change in behavior, and when a large player like a corporation, like SAP, or even like a government, change their behavior, that makes everyone change. So that was some of the rationale of having companies engaged with the large companies. I think there's a lot of value to be made. And so how can social innovators best engage with companies? That's a complicated question that I wanted to address here in the second question. And I will speak about something which is the vision alignment. Usually, social entrepreneurs have a very strong vision. They have a very strong belief. For example, in the case of Autism at Work, a belief that people with autism have unique capabilities. They deserve an opportunity to find meaningful employment in the same level of salary and conditions that anyone else. It's a vision of inclusion, empowerment, and dignity. And so this is the mission, in this case of Specialstern, was to include in the labor force people with autism. That was their mission in this broader vision that everyone, independent of their situation, should have this employment opportunity. So SAP naturally has their own goals. They want to make money. They want to serve their client well. But if they share the vision, if they say, I believe also in this vision, I can make this vision also my own vision. So they may have their specific mission that is different, but if they are aligned with the strong vision proposed by a social entrepreneur, then they may want to partner with you, and they may want to engage with you because they believe in what you're doing and they want to help. And nowadays, people like to be associated with visionary ideas, with new approaches. And so if they see the meaning in your vision, then they may align. And so I always recommend to social entrepreneurs, distinguish between your vision and your mission. Your mission may be to be the best provider of service solutions to companies based with employee workforce with autism. That may be your mission. But your vision, and of course the SAP will not identify with your mission because it's yours, it's not theirs. But the vision of employment opportunities for everyone based on their capabilities, that vision they can align with. So my advice to social entrepreneurs, clarify the distinction between your vision that you want to spread and that you want other people to share your vision, and your mission, which is the specific way in which your organization contributes to achieving the vision. But it's your specific way, others can come to you and contribute to the broader vision in their own ways. Okay? So I think that's a way to try to engage with a corporation or with an investor, is make them believe and share in your vision. That should be inspirational, that should be visionary, that should be a bit idealistic, but it should be so compelling that people want to be part of that vision. The other part of how do you prevent yourself from being subsumed, I think it has to do also with the governance model. So one thing I think that you should avoid, for example, is the idea of exclusivity. Large companies love to ask for exclusivity. They say, okay, we'll partner with you, but we want exclusivity. You can only offer that to us, no one else. That exclusivity has two main disadvantages. One is that by working only with one partner, you become dependent on that partner. And if their strategy changes and they stop the partnership, you basically go out of a job or go bankrupt. The second issue is that if you are exclusive to them, your solution is limited to that organization and is not being open and shared with the world, which is what you want to do as a social innovator. So it's against the ethos of the social innovator. So my recommendation is create a proper governance model, usually even with independent decision makers that may be not a part of the company or not a part of your social enterprise, maybe an independent person, well reputed, that will try to kind of help the partnership fulfill everyone's interests and alignment, and always refuse exclusivity or moderate exclusivity. Maybe you say, okay, we'll give you exclusivity only for a year, but then we want to open to everyone. And of course, because things take time to implement, once you implement and validate, the year have passed and you can open to others. Or you limit exclusivity maybe to a geographical region, but don't give exclusivity because that creates dependence and it's against the ethos of the social innovator. If the partner forces you to accept exclusivity, then the vision may be not aligned. They are not respecting the ethos of the social innovation, and it may be better not to do the partnership because it will not work. It's not aligned enough in terms of the vision. So if the vision is aligned, they should be able to accept not having an exclusive offer to them and that you offer to others, even to their competitors, the same solution. So this is just one specific topic around exclusivity, but exclusivity brings dependence, and dependence is what makes you potentially being subsumed by the other player. There is also sometimes mission locks. There are some things that you write in a statute or that prevents subverting your mission. And so in some cases, there's a partnership between a social enterprise and a large company. The large company likes the social enterprise, wants to acquire the social enterprise, and they sometimes do. And there's the fear of losing control and losing the mission, and that can happen. So sometimes there are some clauses in the statutes of the company being bought that lock in the mission in a way that has to be respected. Or sometimes there's an outside person that has veto power on some things, and it's that guarantor that the mission is respected. So that's one possibility. Sometimes the larger company may be align the vision so much that they agree to have, for example, a B Corp certification where they basically measure their practices, they put impact as one of their key goals, and that also ensures a bit more vision alignment. So there are dangers in partnering with large companies, but those can be managed. And because of all of the benefits that large companies bring to you as a social innovator, I think if you have the opportunity to engage with a large company and partner with them to validate or scale your innovation, I think you should definitely try to do it, because it has a potential to be a game changer for your social innovation. Maybe the third part of the question is the how. But how do I, in practice, align the needs and challenges of a big corporate with my startup, with my social enterprise? Here, I would say maybe three key ideas. One is the idea of value alignment. So, of course, I spoke about vision alignment before. You have a vision and a mission, and you make sure that your partner adheres to your vision, believes in your vision, feels compelled by it, and makes your vision also their vision. But value alignment is taking it to the next stage, is when you find sources of value from your solution that directly benefits the corporation. For example, by deploying this solution, you create a lot of employee engagement. You make your employees more motivated, more enthusiastic about working in your large company. That was one of the outcomes, for example, of this partnership between Specialstern and SAP. All of the employees of SAP became much more loyal and much more identified with SAP because it was doing this good thing. So one is around employee. The other is around customer loyalty and customer value. By doing some of these things and some of these partnerships, you increase the value of your products in the market. For example, when in the case of Colorado, after they created this universal color code for colorblind people, they put this code in products of large companies, like the pencils Viarco in Portugal, like the Uno game by Mattel in the United States. And when Viarco sold more pencils because it had the code, when Uno sold more games because they were inclusive Uno game with the color code added to the game mechanics, then the social value of the solution created commercial value for the company, so they both were in lockstep. And when you find this lockstep of value alignment between societal value and corporate value, then you have the basis for a long-term strategic partnership with your corporate partner. So finding this value alignment, either because of the employee benefits or because of the client value or because of value chain benefits of cost reduction by reducing waste, for example, or other. So when you have a solution that reduces waste in industrial kitchens, you not only save the planet because you need to produce less food and have less carbon emissions, but you also save costs to the companies which are eager to adopt your solution. So in addition to the vision alignment, which you create at the level of ideas and empathy, the value alignment you create at the level of business. It's very specific. It's a customer value, it's a corporate value proposition linking to either employees, client value, or efficiency value for large corporates. Sometimes if you can make a case on multiple fronts, look, if you do this, you make your employees more motivated, your clients more loyal to you and paying a higher price, and you save money on your procurement costs. If you can find multiple angles, then you have a strong case to sell this to a company. Because you may sell the idea to a social innovator inside the company who takes a risk of adopting your solution and creating a partnership. But for that person to sell internally to all the company, it needs to have a value alignment that's clear. So the first thing is value alignment. The second thing is the management model, in the sense that you need to align with the strategy of the company, but at the same time you need to start small with a pilot to validate. So it's this idea of starting small but showing the strategic potential that this has if it gets validated. It's this thinking big but proving small, proving local, that because large companies don't want to take the risk of a wide deployment without validating first. So that's the way that you design it. And then have a scaling model. So if this works, how do we take it to the world? How do we use the resources, competencies, scale and reach, and brand of the company to take this to the world? And there's different approaches. Sometimes it's the company that is the vehicle to disseminate the idea. Sometimes the company is the vehicle to bring other companies on board in a coalition, for example, an industry coalition, so that everyone in, let's say, the fashion industry now adopts this new practice that you are proposing. But it needs to, or it could be the company now does lobbying and the government creates a new regulation that everyone needs to adhere to, and by doing so creates a new, makes your solution mainstream. So you have to think about what's your scaling model once you partner with the corporate. If it works, how do you take it to the world, even beyond your corporate partner? And again, if they are with you in the sense that they have the vision alignment, then they may be willing and eager to see this idea scaling to other areas. For example, in the case of fashion, C&A created a new think tank, Fashion for Good, to create innovations in the fashion industry. And that think tank now has members of all of the fashion brands, and it's financed by all of them. In Portugal, we helped José de Mel Saúde, a medical group, to create a new project around hyperactivity and attention deficit disorder of children, and to create a solution for this issue. And once they validate their solution in some of their clinics, it was a non-medical solution, they spun off these not-for-profit as a way to serve the whole medical sector beyond their group. So there are ways to scale these beyond the initial model. Let me just see how we are on time. So it's 4:05. I will probably take maybe 5 more minutes and then ask if there are any additional questions that you have. Let me see, just select, let me select here, so to move forward a little bit, let me select here this new section about non-profit and for-profit. There were 2 interesting questions. When is the right time to spin off a for-profit entity when you are a non-profit? And how can we transform the non-profit sector into a sustainable, scalable, and appealing one? Let me discuss, especially, I would say, the first one. In some cases, this is a very important element, this idea of spin-off. Many social innovations actually get created inside a municipality, as I mentioned, inside the social sector, inside a charity, and then at some point the project inside becomes more visible, gets some validation, becomes a social innovation, and then there are some organizational phenomena that happen. Envy starts, the other people in the organization start envying the popularity of these projects, and they want to control it, and they start taking degrees of autonomy to the the people who champion the project because they became too important, or sometimes that project gets some resources and they use the resources to cover holes elsewhere in the organization. So if you don't spin off that project from the larger entity, what usually happens is that the project gets basically killed, either intentionally or unintentionally, because it stays with a larger company and it's not a full priority. So if a project gets incubated inside a larger company, at some point it needs to spin off, become independent with a full-time team, ideally the team that developed it inside initially, and have its own life. Okay? So that's one element of this spin-off or spinning off idea. The other element is that sometimes, also in the social sector, you develop an organization or a social innovation, and sometimes an element of it has a commercial revenue model. You can sell a product or service, and in those cases, sometimes what people do is that they create a for-profit entity, owned or not owned by the non-profit, that depends on the situation, and then they run the commercial side of the business, of the social innovation, through the for-profit, and they keep the non-profit for the non-commercial side, and also as a vehicle for fundraising. So for example, in Germany, this is a very typical situation. They don't have a social enterprise model, so typically every project has a charity model alongside an enterprise model, mission-oriented, and they run both in tandem. Of course, there are governance issues. Where does the money flow and how do you, and who controls what? That you need to be as transparent as possible, because if you are not, then you may be accused of mistrust or inappropriately using funds from one side to the other. Sometimes in Portugal, you also have a not-for-profit alongside a for-profit, because some activities are inherently more commercial oriented. For example, CORED, which I mentioned, as a not-for-profit association that works, for example, on early diagnosis of color blindness in schools and awareness raising. And then you have the for-profit that has the license for the code and does the licensing of the code in partnership with companies. And so you have these two models, so you can fundraise and get donations to do awareness campaigns on the not-for-profit, and you can sell licenses to other companies with the for-profit. And as long as you are transparent, that can work very well. So that's part of, I think, of the answer about spinning off. I see a lot of very interesting projects dying off or not reaching the potential they could reach because they get stuck inside a larger not-for-profit in the social sector. They don't get autonomy, a full-time dedicated team, resources, and they end up losing momentum and dying. So that's something that you should be aware and attentive. There are some cases where this has worked. For example, Speak, which is now a very successful social enterprise, was spun off as a social enterprise from a not-for-profit youth movement in Leiria. Sometimes these transitions are painful because there are egos involved, there are interests involved. Usually they are a bit contentious, but you may need to face that contention because it's for the best of both the organization that stays and the project that gets created. Maybe the final question before we close, also because of the time, is how can we transform the not-for-profit sector into a sustainable, scalable, and appealing one? I'm not sure you can transform it, all of it, but there are segments of the social sector that I think can become more sustainable, more scalable, and more appealing in terms of impact. They're appealing by themselves already, but more appealing in terms of impact. I would say that in particular, the clever use of technology in open or volunteer empowerment-driven models can make a not-for-profit very scalable, very sustainable, and very appealing in terms of impact. So projects like Wikipedia or Patient Innovation or others can actually have the elements of the more commercial version of social entrepreneurs, while still residing in the non-profit sector. So I think, and this may be my final comment, the two most appealing segments of the social entrepreneurship sphere, where I believe a lot of great innovation and great unicorns will be created, is on one hand in the segment that I would call impact ventures, which are impact-oriented commercial ventures that have a very strong alignment between the social side and the commercial side. They don't live in that duality that's schizophrenic. They can align the two sides so well that they can just run their solution, and they achieve both commercial success and impact success. So impact ventures, I think, will be a very growth area of the economy. And the other one will be, I would say, the open platform models using digital or using these network mechanisms that can transform a non-profit into indeed a sustainable, scalable, and very impact-oriented organization and solution for the world. So I think we are going to see a lot of movement, a lot of action in these two segments. One segment, you have impact investors to finance this segment, and that ties a bit to the financing questions that we also received. And the other segment should have strategic, impact-oriented philanthropy as a key source of financing for these types of innovations. There was a question about social impact bonds as well. And here I would say, if you're interested, a recent and good report from Bridges Funds Management actually gives you a very good overview of social impact bonds as a financial tool for scaling social impact. So I refer you also to these reports, as I don't have time now to elaborate further on this topic.